can continue from where we left last week. And I want us today to focus on innate immunity. But as I was introducing the class, immunology in general, I said immunology can be divided into two, where we have what we call innate immunity and adaptive immunity. And there's some features we talked about of what really defines what innate immunity is, and as well as what really defines what adaptive immunity is. And if I remember, one of the things we talked about is that relative to adaptive immunity, innate immunity is non-specific. So sometimes it's referred to as non-specific immunity, while adaptive immunity is referred to as specific immunity. Now, today we'll be able to understand why sometimes it's called non-specific. But again, as we were just discussing last time, we saw that innate kind of the things that are natural, the things that are born. Somebody talked about congenital. Somebody said, okay, so these are like the defense mechanisms that are there at birth that help an individual overcome any invasion, as if there is an infectious agent that tries to enter the body, so that then would cause an immune response. So the initial immune response that takes place would be rather what we are calling the innate immunity. So before we go into the details of the innate immunity, it's important for us to understand, so what are some of these features anatomically that would be what constitutes what the innate immunity. And so I'll start by looking at the anatomy of the innate immunity, then go deeper into what innate immunity is. But before that, we just look at generally how immunity is, the anatomy of the immune system, before we go into what innate immunity is. We look at the generally how anatomically how the immune system has positioned itself. And so there are two key features in as far as the innate immune system is concerned, not innate immunity, immune system is concerned in general. That means both the adaptive and the innate. So anatomically, we would have what we call the primary lymphoid organs, as well as the secondary lymphoid organs, or what we call the peripheral lymphoid organs. So primary lymphoid organs are where the main immune response occurs, where the main cells that run the immune system are either generated or mature. And maybe the secondary would be where maybe other activities in the immune system occur. So in terms of the details, the primary lymphoid organs are specifically the bone marrow and the thymus. These two, the bone marrow and the thymus, these are what we constitute the primary lymphoid organs. And why are they the primary lymphoid organs? Because this is where B cells, T cells, and lymphocytes in general originate. You've just done, I think, hematology. You dealt with hematopoiesis. We know that cells originate. First of all, cells are usually what we call, the cells are usually stem. So they are not specialized into anything. Then later on, they develop as they encounter the environment. They, of course, continue maturing into different sets of cells that we know. Now, bone marrow, which is, of course, part of the bone, is a key area where hematopoiesis occurs. And in most cases, we have B and T cells that are originating from this. The hematopoietic stem cells are originating here. And specifically, B lymphocytes mature in the bone marrow. And as I previously introduced the course, we saw that B lymphocytes run another system of immune system called the adaptive, what we refer to as the humoral. And we also saw that T cells play a very key role in the adaptive immune system, where a system that we call cell-mediated immunity. So these are key because the bone marrow is where now these cells originate from, and specifically B cells are able to mature in the bone marrow. And we know that it is a key hematopoietic site. The other, of course, lymphoid organ is the thymus. And thymus anatomically is just located just in front of the sternum, just between your lungs here. Specifically, that is where the thymus is found. And of course, this is where the T lymphocytes, in fact, the word T emanates from thymus. So the word T emanates from thymus, and that is where the T lymphocytes mature. Let me admit a few individuals here. Okay, so we have an idea currently that T lymphocytes play a key role, of course, in the immune system. And so because of that, the bone marrow and the thymus anatomically are referred to as the primary lymphoid organs, or rather, yeah, this is where part of key cells in the immune system develop. And of course, all these cells that we are talking about are mainly running the adaptive immune system. We also have what we call the secondary lymphoid organs. We have the secondary lymphoid organs, and these are quite a number. And these sites, we have specifically or mainly what is happening in the secondary lymphoid organs is that these lymphocytes, be it B cells, be it T cells, are encountering antigens, and then they get activated and initiate immune responses. So we are calling them secondary because these are the regions where antigens are now presented, especially to T cells. And once they encounter T cells, they cease to be naive. No, at this particular point, there is just the synthesis of these lymphocytes, B and T cells. They are being generated. So at this particular point, that is in secondary lymphoid organs, that is where they are now going to encounter antigens. And once they encounter antigens, they cease from becoming naive. They become now activated towards a specific antigen. And so, depending on the type of cell, A cell, we know the main role of a B cell. Can somebody remind us what B cells do? Anybody to remind us what B cell? Once a B cell encounters an antigen, what would it do then? Patrick, your hand is raised.
They produce antibodies.
They'll produce antibodies. And at this particular point, when they are producing antibodies, what do we refer to them as? Are they still B cells?
No.
Patrick, what name do we call them?
Plasma cells.
That's fine then. It's plasma cells. All right. So back to the secondary lymphoid organs. These secondary lymphoid organs would include lymph nodes. I'm sure after you did your anatomy as well as your physiology, you have an idea of what lymph nodes are. And even your high school biology, of course, you must have talked about lymph. Let me admit a few. Okay. You must talked about lymph nodes. And so lymph nodes are the key area, they are the key sites where there is antigen presentation. They are the key sites where there's antigen presentation. And maybe in the previous class, I must have talked about what we call the traditional cells that are antigen presenting cells. I must have mentioned among the white blood cells, we have a white blood cells, a white blood cell that is traditionally referred to as an antigen presenting cell. I must have talked about it in the previous class. We mentioned when you're just introducing in general. Anybody who remembers the cell I talked about as the key antigen presenting cell? Anybody remembering it?
Dendritic cell.
Lymph nodes, we have very high concentrations of T cells, B cells, and dendritic cells, as well as macrophages. So macrophages, yeah, would present antigens to some extent, but not necessarily. Don't know if somebody wants to join ama kuna swali. Yeah, so basically antigens are presented to T cells. Then we said we have two types of T cells, the T what and T what. We said we have two types of T cells generally, T what and T what.
Helper cells and T cytotoxic cells.
I've gotten the T cytotoxic part. I didn't get the initial part.
T
Yes.
helper.
Okay. That. All right. So I get you. Now a follow-up question: of these two, which one now interacts with B cells? Of these two, T cytotoxic versus T helper, which one interacts with the B cells? T helper. Victor says T helper. Okay. Then, so in the lymph nodes, we are going to have antigen presentation. Right. We're talking about the spleen as the other lymphoid organ. The spleen, already talked about it, to have to be part of, located near the abdomen, of course, and its main role would be involving blood-borne antigens. Now, so parasites like malaria, of course, are blood-borne antigens, some bacteria blood-borne antigens. So in this particular site, you're likely going to encounter the immune cells, where then they will be presented, and then, of course, an immune response would occur. Another site for this response would be what would be referring to as a secondary immune lymphoid organ would be the MALT. That is the mucosal associated lymphoid tissue. That is what we refer to as the mucosal surfaces. And the mucosal surfaces are mostly found in a number of systems, including the gastrointestinal system, the respiratory system. They're all lined up by a mucosa. So the mucosa by itself is also a primary lymphoid organ. So this is where, of course, antigens are then presented to cells and the immune response is activated. That is why we are referring to them as a secondary or other peripheral lymphoid organs. So we would have the GIT. So the GIT would call it GALT. So it's part of MALT, the mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. So we call it MALT in this sense. So GIT, G of course now would stand for gastrointestinal tract associated lymphoid tissue. Of course, G will stand for GIT, then associated lymphoid tissue. It's part of MALT. And then in the respiratory tract, we have what we call the BALT, and the BALT is the bronchus associated lymphoid tissue. So these combined plus other mucosal surfaces are what we refer to as the MALT, or rather the mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. And so these protect especially the mucosal surfaces from pathogens, since they contain very large numbers of immune cells. And at this particular point, any form of infection is dealt with rather less successfully, because at this particular point, we have a large number of immune cells, and these immune cells are able to interact with any infectious agents, and they're able to either trigger an immune response or rather deal with the infectious agent and clear it. So that is in the mucosa. It's a very interesting area of research where people are understanding more and more how the MALT is and what type of cells are found there and what is the composition of MALT. It's currently a place of focus in terms of research. We also have the tonsils. The tonsils, of course, we know where they are located in the throat, and they are part of the MALT. They also act as the first line of defense when, of course, you're ingesting any pathogens or you're inhaling any pathogens. They can still, the mucosa, of course, there's a mucosa in the tonsils. So within the tonsils also, it's going to encounter some of these cells of the immune response, and once they encounter the cells of the immune response, they're able to deal with those cells at that particular level. So it's part of it. So technically, some of these organs play a key role in innate immune response, and some of them play a key role in adaptive immune response. Like we've seen, lymph nodes would specifically be more lean towards the adaptive as well as the spleen. But if you look at the tonsils and the MALT, are more likely to be dealing with the innate type of immune response. But in a moment, we'll see exactly what innate is. And once we understand what the innate immune system is, then definitely we're going to see the organs that are associated with its response once an invasion is happening in the body. So, of course, if you look at all these organs, starting from the bone marrow, the thymus, those forming part of the primary lymphoid organs, and lymph nodes, spleen, MALT, and tonsils, we can classify them in terms of systems. We can classify them in terms of systems. So maybe if I would to know, I just want to know, all these organs, where can we classify them? All these organs, where can we classify them in terms of systems, the body systems? Which part of systems do they form? Well,
The lymphatic system.
the lymphatic system. Yeah, of course, lymphatic system. That's the only system. Lymphatic system, yes, correct. Lymphatic system, which organs can we classify for lymphatic system hapa? I want to believe in lymph nodes, of course.
Lymph
Then
nodes.
spleen, because spleen filters kazi yake sana ni kufilter blood. And would we say the lymphatic system is also part of the circulatory system?
I didn't want to contribute to that. I only wanted to add hematopoietic system.
Hematopoietic system. Okay. Okay. Now, maybe let me do this. Bone marrow, tunaweza classify kwa system gani? Bone marrow, mesha? Bone marrow.
Lymphatics.
Bone marrow ni
Lymphatic.
lymphatic. What about the thymus? Maybe I would classify this in the skeletal system. Thymus, I would put it in the endocrine. Of course, lymph nodes na spleen, I'd put them in the lymphatic. Then, of course, MALT, it will depend on where it's found. If it's in GIT, it will be, of course, it's part of the GIT. If it's in the respiratory, it will be part of the respiratory. Tonsils, I don't know where I'll classify tonsils. Yeah, but anyway, so the key systems that are involved are circulatory systems, and that is specifically lymphatic. So the circulatory system, so it's the blood and lymphatics. Yeah, so those are the main systems that are involved here. But as you see, we all have other systems, the GIT, the respiratory, we have the exoskeleton, we have, yeah, quite a number of systems, but the key ones are here. That is where we find, of course, blood cells, and these blood cells are in the blood system, of course, but they also end up in the lymphatic system. So they're in those circulatory systems, of course. Okay, so that is specifically the anatomy. This is just to show you, rather elaborate, the lymphatic system, how it looks like, where some of the lymph nodes are found. Some of the key organs, of course, the thymus, we've seen its key here. We've seen the spleen, where it's located. We know where the bone marrow, where the bone is, and of course, the bone marrow. The bone marrow is down deep there. That is where we find the bone marrow in a bone, of course, in the long bones. It's majorly found in long bones. That is the site for hematopoiesis. Okay, also see the small intestines have the mucosa, and the mucosa, we've seen that it's full of malt. We've also seen things like so this is, of course, every lymph node has an artery and a vein an artery that is supplying and a vein that is draining it. Yeah, and they are found in all these locations on the body. We have lymph nodes here, the hands, of course, the armpits, we have quite a number. We have here under the cheeks, next to the heart, we have quite a number, all the way to the legs. Here we have lymph nodes. So these small dots are, of course, representations of the lymph nodes, or rather the lymphatic system. Yeah, so up to that point, we have an idea, rather we know what the anatomy of the immune system looks like. We would have in primary lymphoid organs. We also have what we call secondary lymphoid organs. Primary lymphoid organs being mainly the bone marrow and the thymus. The secondary lymphoid organs being mainly the MALT, the spleen, the lymph nodes, as well as the tonsils. So these are what you are referring to as the lymphoid organs that are involved, of course, in the immune system.